For the outside world, my marriage looked perfect. Olivia and I had been together for almost a decade, building a life that others envied. We had met in our mid-20s, back when the thrill of love felt like an unstoppable force, capable of making anything possible. She was radiant, the kind of woman who turned heads without even trying. Her laughter had a way of filling up a room, and when she looked at me back then, it was with eyes full of admiration. I had convinced myself that we were a team, that what we had was something unshakable, something built to last. I was wrong. The truth is, I was always the one putting in the effort. Olivia had a way of making things feel effortless, as if our relationship thrived on its own without the need for maintenance. But I knew better. I knew the long hours I spent at work weren't just about providing for us. They were about making sure she could live the life she wanted. I had no problem working hard. I thrived on it. It made me feel like I was building something real. The late nights, the weekends sacrificed, the exhaustion, I told myself it was all worth it because it was for us. But in reality, it was just me. Looking back, the cracks had been there for years. At first, they were subtle. The way she lost interest in the little things we used to enjoy together, the way she seemed distant even when she was right next to me. She used to curl up against me on the couch, tracing absent-minded circles on my forearm while we watched movies. At some point that stopped. Then it was the eye contact. A woman like Olivia had once been impossible to ignore. She was magnetic, drawing people toward her without even trying. But somewhere along the way, her gaze had started to drift past me, as if I were just another piece of furniture in the house. I had ignored it for as long as I could, chalking it up to the natural ebb and flow of marriage. People changed over time, right? The passion cooled, but that didn't mean love disappeared. I told myself it was just stress, just life getting in the way. I reassured myself that every couple went through rough patches. But deep down, I had already started to wonder. The first time I felt it, the deep, twisting feeling in my gut that something was truly wrong, was about a year ago. It wasn't anything dramatic. Just a moment. A shift in the air between us. She had come home late from a girls' night out, smelling of perfume that wasn't hers, the kind of overly sweet floral scent that clung to her like a second skin. When I asked how the night had gone, she hesitated just long enough for me to notice. But I didn't push. Because I didn't want to know. Now, sitting at my desk at work, staring at my reflection in the darkened computer screen, I could feel the weight of all those ignored moments pressing down on me. Something was coming. I could feel it, even if I couldn't yet see it. I buried myself in work to ignore the gnawing unease. Routine became my sanctuary. I woke up early, hit the gym, drowned myself in coffee, and lost myself in spreadsheets and meetings. The rhythm of productivity numbed me, kept me from dwelling on the growing distance between Olivia and me. I told myself that relationships went through phases. That love, no matter how deep, eventually settled into something quieter, less volatile. But in the quiet, doubt festered. We still had dinner together, still exchanged pleasantries, still played the part of a happy couple in front of friends. But the intimacy was gone. It had been months since she reached for me first, since she curled up beside me without prompting. Our conversations had become rehearsed, predictable. She asked how my day was, and I gave her the usual answer. Busy but good. I asked about hers, and she responded with something vague, something meaningless. And then there were the excuses. I'm too tired tonight. I have an early morning tomorrow. Just not in the mood, babe. At first, I didn't think much of it. Stress did that to people, right? She had taken on a new job, one that seemed to demand more of her time. Late nights, weekend meetings, business trips that hadn't been there before. I wanted to believe she was just adjusting to a heavier workload. That's what I told myself, what I needed to believe. But there was a growing weight in my chest, one that made it harder and harder to ignore the truth staring me in the face. The Olivia I knew, the one I had built a life with, was slipping away. I noticed the small changes first. A new perfume, different from the one she had worn for years. The way she started dressing just a little nicer, even on days when she wasn't seeing anyone important. The extra time she spent getting ready, checking her reflection in the mirror with a focus she hadn't shown in a long time. Then there were the text messages. She had never been secretive with her phone before. It used to sit openly on the coffee table, buzzing occasionally with messages from friends or coworkers. But now, she kept it close. Close enough that I started noticing how quickly she would flip it over when I walked by. How she would angle herself just slightly away from me when she typed. One night, as we sat on the couch watching a show we had both lost interest in, I caught a glimpse of her screen. Just a name. Nothing incriminating. Megan. A friend I had heard about but never met. Olivia had always mentioned her in passing, in the kind of way that made me believe they were just casual acquaintances. But Olivia didn't smile at her phone when Megan texted. She didn't tuck her hair behind her ear in that shy, unconscious way she used to when I flirted with her. And she certainly didn't bite her lip, eyes flickering with something close to anticipation. I didn't say anything that night. I wanted to pretend I hadn't seen. Because if I acknowledged it, even for a second, I would have to confront what it meant. And I wasn't ready. I told myself I was imagining things. That I was being paranoid. But once suspicion takes root, it spreads like a disease. I started noticing more. She spent longer in the bathroom, her phone always with her. She started coming home later, her excuses flimsy, unconvincing. And when she was home, she wasn't really there. She sat across from me at dinner, but she was somewhere else. Her eyes had that distant look, the one people get when they're thinking about someone who isn't in the room. I tried to brush it off. I reminded myself of all the years we had spent together, of the life we had built. Olivia wasn't the type of woman who would cheat. At least, that's what I had always believed. But then I started testing her. Small things at first. Asking about her day, watching the way she hesitated before answering. The slight falter in her voice when she gave me a too-perfect explanation. The way she fidgeted under my gaze, like she knew I was studying her, dissecting every word. Then, one night I asked her outright. "Do you ever feel like we're drifting apart?" She barely looked up from her phone. "What? No, of course not." It was too fast. Too easy. I forced a smile, nodding as if I believed her. But inside, something twisted in my gut. I started paying closer attention. I began checking our phone bill, something I had never done before. Late at night, while she slept beside me, I would go through the call logs, scanning for numbers I didn't recognize. And there it was, one number, over and over again. Calls that lasted late into the night. Texts at odd hours. My chest tightened. I copied the number down, my hands shaking. I didn't recognize it. I didn't want to recognize it. At work the next day, during my lunch break, I sat in my car, staring at the number on my screen. My thumb hovered over the call button. I told myself I wasn't the kind of man who checked up on his wife. That I wasn't the jealous, overbearing type. But I needed to know. I searched the number. And when the name popped up, my breath left me in a sharp exhale. It wasn't Megan. It wasn't even a woman. It was a man. I sat there, gripping my phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. My mind went blank, my body numb. I read the name over and over again, as if I could change it through sheer will. This was it. The proof I had been trying so hard not to find. Olivia was cheating on me. The moment I saw his name, something inside me shifted. It was like stepping into a world I didn't recognize, a place where everything I had built, everything I had believed in, was a lie. My marriage wasn't struggling. It wasn't going through a rough patch. It was already over. I had just been too blind to see it. I didn't confront her. Not yet. Instead, I watched. I observed. I let my suspicion turn into certainty. And it didn't take long. 2 days later, I left work early without telling her. I parked down the street from our house, where she wouldn't see me, and waited. My stomach churned as I sat there, gripping the steering wheel, watching the front door like a predator stalking its prey. At 2:37 p.m., she came home. 30 minutes earlier than usual. And she wasn't alone. I saw him. A man I had never met, stepping out of his car like he belonged here. He was tall, confident, dressed too well for a casual visit. I watched as Olivia opened the door for him without hesitation, as if this was routine. As if she had done this 100 times before. And then they disappeared inside. I sat there, frozen. My mind screamed at me to move, to do something, but my body refused to listen. I stared at the house that I had worked so hard to provide for her, the home we had built together, the place where we were supposed to be safe from the world. And now, it was the scene of my own humiliation. I don't know how long I stayed there. Minutes. Hours. It didn't matter. When he finally left, Olivia walked him to the door, laughing softly at something he said. Laughing. Like she didn't have a care in the world. Like she wasn't destroying me with every moment she spent in his arms. I should have stormed inside. I should have confronted her, screamed at her, demanded answers. But I didn't. Because deep down, I already knew. This wasn't the first time. Olivia had been cheating on me long before this. The pieces started falling into place. The late nights. The sudden disinterest in me. The careful way she had distanced herself, little by little, making sure I wouldn't notice. And the worst part? She had gotten away with it. For years, maybe? I had no idea how long this had been going on, how many times she had come home to me after being with someone else. The thought made me sick. That night, I lay in bed beside her, listening to the steady rhythm of her breathing as she slept. My mind raced with everything I had seen, every detail I had ignored. The way she smelled faintly of cologne that wasn't mine. The way she had started showering before bed, something she never used to do. The way she turned away from me in her sleep, curling into herself as if I were nothing more than an afterthought. I wasn't angry. Not yet. I was something worse. I was cold. Detached. Because now, I had a plan. I stopped seeing Olivia as my wife after that night. She became something else, someone else. A stranger who had been living in my house, sleeping in my bed, wearing my last name like it meant nothing. I felt nothing when I looked at her anymore. No love, no warmth, not even hatred. Just emptiness. And in that emptiness, something new took shape. I didn't confront her. I didn't lash out or demand answers. What was the point? She would lie, twist the truth, try to salvage the life she had already burned to the ground. I wasn't going to give her that chance. Instead, I let her believe everything was normal. I still kissed her goodbye in the mornings. I still asked about her day. I still played the part of the clueless husband, letting her feel safe, secure, unchallenged. And while she lived in her fantasy, I was preparing for war. I started gathering evidence. I went through her phone when she left it unattended, screenshotting messages and sending them to myself. I checked her emails, her calendar, her bank statements. Every detail painted a clearer picture of the woman I had once trusted with my life. She had been cheating for over a year. Not just with him. With others. I found messages from different numbers, different names. Some of them stretched back months, others even longer. She had been doing this long before I ever suspected. And the worst part? She never even tried to cover her tracks. She knew I wouldn't look. She knew I trusted her. That realization cut deeper than anything else. She hadn't just betrayed me, she had assumed I was too blind, too naive, too devoted to ever see the truth. She thought I was weak. That was her mistake. The weight of her betrayal settled into something cold and sharp inside me, a quiet rage that no longer burned but instead solidified into something unmovable. I didn't waste time with anger or sadness. I had already given Olivia too much of my life, too much of my trust. Now I focused on the next steps, on making sure that when this all unraveled, I would be the one left standing. I spent nights combing through every detail of her affairs, tracing her lies like a roadmap, each new discovery fueling my resolve. There were receipts for expensive dinners I never shared with her, hotel stays she had never mentioned, flights she had taken alone when she had claimed to be visiting friends. The patterns were unmistakable. Olivia wasn't just unfaithful, she was reckless, arrogant in her deception, convinced I would never catch her. I started playing the part of the loving husband with more conviction, making sure she never saw the shift in me. I wanted her to feel secure, to believe that she had gotten away with everything. She would kiss me when she came home, smiling with the satisfaction of a woman who had the best of both worlds, never suspecting that I knew the truth. I kept my routine the same, let her keep living her double life, all while preparing for the moment I would rip it out from under her. I sought legal advice, made sure I understood exactly what I could do, how I could protect myself. I wasn't going to be the man who walked away with nothing, who let himself be humiliated in silence. The more I learned, the more disgusted I became. She hadn't just cheated, she had built an entire existence behind my back, one where I was nothing more than an afterthought. There were text messages from different men, all with the same tone of familiarity, the same empty flirtation that once belonged to me. She had carved out time for them the way she had once made time for me, fitting them into the spaces of our life like a puzzle piece that had always been missing. It wasn't just physical. It was emotional. She had checked out of our marriage long before I ever realized it. I couldn't let her win. I wouldn't let her walk away with my money, my home, my dignity. She had already stolen years of my life. I wouldn't give her anything else. I was patient, methodical, making sure every move I made was calculated. She had played me for a fool, but she had underestimated me. And soon, she would know exactly what that mistake would cost her. The days passed slowly, each one bringing me closer to the inevitable. I moved carefully, methodically, making sure I left no room for error. Olivia continued living her lie, oblivious to the storm gathering around her. She still kissed me goodbye in the mornings, still sent me empty little texts throughout the day, as if she were keeping up the illusion for herself as much as for me. I played along, responding just as I always had, letting her believe she had me wrapped around her finger. The difference was, now I was watching. Now, I knew exactly what she was doing the moment she stepped out of our house. I had her schedule memorized. I knew when she left work early, when she disappeared for hours without explanation, when she would come home smelling faintly of someone else. I let her think I was too distracted to notice, let her assume I was still the same trusting fool she had been stringing along for years. But in the background, I was dismantling her life piece by piece. I made copies of everything, bank statements, credit card bills, emails, even phone records. I compiled undeniable proof of her affairs, enough to make sure she wouldn't walk away with a single cent more than she deserved. I met with my lawyer in secret, strategizing the best way to protect myself, to make sure she had no way of twisting the narrative in her favor. What struck me the most in all of this was how little guilt Olivia seemed to feel. She was so comfortable in her deception, so secure in the idea that I would never suspect a thing. She came home to me at night as if she weren't spending her afternoons in hotel rooms with other men. She curled up beside me on the couch, scrolling through her phone, likely texting one of them as I sat just inches away. The sheer audacity of it, the arrogance, made my blood boil. She had no respect for me. Not as a husband, not as a man. The patience I had forced myself to hold on to was running thin. I knew I couldn't act on impulse, knew I had to be smart about how I handled this, but the more I watched her, the more I wanted to rip the mask off her face and make her see exactly what she had done. But I held back. Because the moment she realized what I knew, the game would change. I needed to control the moment, to make sure that when the truth finally came crashing down around her, it would do so on my terms. And then, fate handed me the perfect opportunity. Olivia had made a mistake, one so careless, so painfully obvious, that I almost laughed when I saw it. She had scheduled an afternoon at a clothing store, the same store she had once dragged me to on countless occasions, where she had spent hours trying on dress after dress while I sat patiently waiting for her. But this time, she wasn't going alone. She was meeting him there. And she had no idea that I was planning to be there, too. The day arrived, and I moved like a man possessed. I wasn't nervous. I wasn't second-guessing. I had already mourned my marriage, already processed the betrayal. Now, there was only action. I left work early under the pretense of grabbing lunch, my hands steady as I drove to the clothing store Olivia had so carelessly chosen for her little rendezvous. The store itself was upscale, a place she had dragged me to in the past when she wanted to try on expensive dresses she didn't need. I knew the layout, the fitting rooms in the back, the soft lighting, the curtains that barely concealed the people inside. She thought she was being clever, choosing a location where she could easily blend in, where their affair would be hidden in plain sight. But today, she wouldn't be hidden from me. I parked across the street, taking my time as I stepped out of the car, my pulse calm despite the rage burning beneath my skin. I had spent weeks preparing for this, making sure that when the moment came, I wouldn't act recklessly. There would be no screaming, no public meltdown, no scene that could be twisted against me later. I wanted Olivia to feel the weight of her choices, to watch everything she had built collapse around her without me ever raising my voice. She had taken everything from me, my trust, my dignity, my peace. Now it was my turn. I entered the store and moved with purpose, scanning the aisles, listening. It didn't take long to find them. Laughter. Low voices. The unmistakable intimacy of two people who thought they were alone. My stomach twisted, but I kept my expression neutral as I walked toward the fitting rooms. The curtains weren't fully closed, just enough to keep up the illusion of privacy, but not enough to block the view completely. I stopped just outside, watching through the narrow gap. She was in his arms. Her hands pressed against his chest, her lips inches from his, her body wrapped around him in a way that left no doubt about what they were doing. And the worst part? She looked happy. Relaxed? Like she had done this 100 times before. Like she wasn't sneaking around behind the back of the man who had given her everything. I didn't move. Didn't speak. I just stood there, letting the weight of the moment sink in. And then, when I had seen enough, I pulled out my phone and took a picture. One. Then another. Evidence, solid and undeniable. Proof of what I already knew. And then I walked away. I didn't need to catch her in the act. She wasn't worth the satisfaction of an explosion, of a confrontation that would only end in more lies, more manipulation. Instead, I would dismantle her life the way she had tried to dismantle mine, quietly, ruthlessly, leaving her with nothing. She had built this illusion of security, this belief that she could have it all, that I would never find out. But she was wrong. She had already lost. She just didn't know it yet. By the time Olivia finally came home that evening, I had already set everything in motion. The locks were changed. The bank accounts were frozen. Her bags were packed and waiting for her outside. And as she stood there, staring at the life she had just lost, the realization finally dawning in her wide, panicked eyes, I simply watched. No words. No explanations. Just the silence of a man who had nothing left to say. Olivia stood outside the house, her expression frozen somewhere between shock and disbelief. Her gaze darted between the suitcases stacked neatly beside the front door, and the lock she had just discovered no longer turned with her key. I could see the realization hitting her in slow waves, the full weight of what I had done crashing down piece by piece. She lifted her hand to knock, hesitated, then pulled out her phone. A second later, my own vibrated in my pocket. I didn't need to check the screen to know it was her. I let it ring. She tried again. And again. Each time, her movements became more frantic, her body language shifting from confused to desperate. Finally, after her fourth attempt, I stepped forward and opened the door. She looked up at me, eyes filled with something I almost mistook for remorse, but I knew better by now. It wasn't guilt. It was fear. Fear that she had finally lost control of the narrative. I said nothing as I leaned against the doorframe, blocking her entrance. She opened her mouth, searching for the right words, but what could she possibly say? An excuse? A lie? An apology that would mean nothing? I could see her brain working, scrambling for a way out, but there wasn't one. Not this time. She glanced at the suitcases. What is this? I didn't answer. I just watched her, my silence heavier than any words I could offer. Her breath hitched as she realized there would be no argument, no back and forth where she could twist things in her favor. No chance to gaslight, to manipulate, to play the victim. This was already decided. She was already gone. She shook her head, as if she could will this all away, as if she still believed she had control. We need to talk. She tried, stepping forward, but I didn't move. I didn't need to. She wasn't coming back inside. Where am I supposed to go? Her voice cracked just slightly, her confidence slipping. I shrugged. Not my problem. Her face twisted into something ugly then, anger flaring to the surface when she realized that begging wouldn't work. You can't just throw me out of my own house. I raised an eyebrow. Your house? The first words I had spoken to her all evening, and they cut deep. Her mouth snapped shut. She knew the truth as well as I did. The house had never been in her name. She had contributed nothing to it, just as she had contributed nothing to our life together in the end. She had taken, used, drained me dry, and now she was standing here, realizing that she had gambled everything and lost. She tried again, her voice softer now, trying to find a crack in the armor. We can work through this. I almost laughed. Almost. Instead, I pulled my phone from my pocket, scrolled to the pictures I had taken that afternoon, and held it up so she could see. Her own face stared back at her, smiling, flushed, tangled up in another man's arms. She went still, her breath catching, her entire body recoiling as if I had struck her. I saw the exact moment the last of her defenses crumbled, when she understood that this was final. I let her stare at the proof of her own betrayal for another few seconds before tucking my phone away. Then I stepped back inside and, without another word, shut the door in her face. She pounded on it, shouted my name, tried everything she could to get me to let her back in. I listened for a while, watched through the peephole as she cycled through denial, anger, bargaining. But I had already heard enough. I turned, walked away, and for the first time in months, I felt something close to peace. Olivia didn't leave right away. She lingered on the porch, pacing back and forth, pulling out her phone, likely calling whoever she thought could help her. I sat in the living room, lights off, listening to the faint sound of her voice carrying through the door. The anger in her tone had faded, replaced by something weaker, more fragile. Panic. She had always been so sure of herself, so confident in her ability to manipulate any situation to her advantage. But not this time. There was nothing left for her to twist, no lies left to spin. After a while, her footsteps stopped. I checked my phone, saw a flurry of unread messages, most of them pathetic attempts at justification. It's not what you think. Please, can we just talk? You don't understand. Then, when those didn't work, the real Olivia came out. You can't do this to me. I have a right to be in that house. You're overreacting. Don't be an idiot. I silenced my phone and tossed it aside. She could scream, she could beg, she could threaten, it didn't matter. She was already gone. Eventually, she must have realized I wasn't coming back out because she stopped knocking. I heard her rustling through her bags, maybe digging for a set of keys, only to remember that I had changed the locks hours ago. Then, at last, the sound of her footsteps retreating down the front steps, followed by the distant roar of a car engine fading into the night. But this wasn't over. I knew that. Olivia wasn't the type to accept defeat easily. The next morning, I woke up to a missed call from her mother. A voicemail, too. I debated deleting it without listening, but curiosity got the better of me. The message was exactly what I expected, soft-spoken concern laced with gentle manipulation. Olivia is very upset. She said you two had an argument, and now she has nowhere to go. I don't know what happened, but don't you think you're being a little harsh? Maybe you should sit down and talk this through. Marriage is about working through things together. I deleted it and blocked her number. By noon, Olivia had escalated. She started showing up at my office, waiting outside in her car. She never came in, probably knowing she couldn't cause a scene in front of my coworkers, but she made sure I saw her. Just sitting there, watching. My phone buzzed every hour with new attempts, some pleading, some laced with venom, others swinging wildly between the two. I made a mistake, but we can fix this. You're ruining both our lives over something stupid. You are the most heartless bastard I've ever met. I didn't respond. That weekend she tried the last thing she had left, our mutual friends. Messages started rolling in from people I hadn't spoken to in months, people who hadn't cared enough to check in on me when I was drowning in the misery of a failing marriage but suddenly had plenty to say now that Olivia was on the losing end. She's really struggling, man. Maybe just hear her out. I don't know the full story, but she's devastated. Do you really want to throw away years together over a mistake? I ignored them all. Then, she did what I had been expecting all along. She called him. The man she had thrown everything away for, the one she had risked our marriage for. But, like most men in affairs, he had only been in it for the thrill, for the secrecy. Now that the secrecy was gone, so was he. He didn't answer her calls. He didn't text back. He didn't open his door when she showed up at his place. He had taken what he wanted from her and discarded her the second she became a liability. And that's when Olivia finally broke. I knew it had happened when I heard the knock on my door 3 nights later. Not the desperate pounding from before, not the entitled demand for entry. Just a soft, hesitant knock. I checked the peephole and found her standing there, looking like a woman who had lost everything. Her clothes were wrinkled, her hair was a mess, her eyes red and hollow. She had always been so put together, always composed, always confident in the power she held over people. But now, she just looked pathetic. She stood there for nearly 5 minutes, shifting on her feet, waiting. Maybe hoping I would be the man I used to be, the one who loved her, who would take pity on her, who would let her in. But I wasn't that man anymore. She had destroyed him. So I did the same thing I had done before. I turned and walked away. And this time, she didn't knock again. Olivia never knocked on my door again after that night. That was the moment she realized there was no coming back, no last-minute redemption, no carefully crafted apology that could undo what she had done. She had played the game and lost, and now, for the first time in her life, there was no one left to catch her when she fell. I didn't wonder where she went after that. I didn't care. She had spent years choosing other men over me. Let one of them deal with the wreckage she had become. The divorce was swift. I had made sure of that. My lawyer had everything prepared before she even had a chance to drag it out. I had proof, more than enough of it, and when her lawyer saw what I had compiled, Olivia had no room to fight. There was no alimony, no drawn-out court battle, no second chances. The house was mine, the assets split in a way that left her with only the bare minimum. She tried to argue, tried to negotiate, but there was no sympathy left for her. She had taken enough. The last time I saw her was at the final meeting with our lawyers. She looked smaller, like the weight of her own choices had finally begun to crush her. She barely spoke, barely lifted her gaze. When she signed the papers, her hands shook. I didn't feel satisfaction watching her fall apart. I didn't feel pity either. I felt nothing at all. She was a ghost after that, fading from my life completely. Mutual friends distanced themselves, either out of guilt for taking her side or out of fear that they would be the next to be cut off. I didn't care. They weren't my friends anymore. I had wasted enough time with people who only cared when it was convenient for them. Olivia must have tried to rebuild somewhere else, but I never bothered to find out where. The number she had called me from 1,000 times was eventually disconnected. Her social media went silent. She had gotten what she wanted, freedom. And now she could live with it. As for me, life moved on. It was strange, at first, living in a house that had once belonged to both of us, but over time, I made it mine. I replaced the furniture she had picked out, repainted the walls, got rid of everything that reminded me of her. The emptiness I had once feared became my peace. I didn't need her, didn't need the weight of her betrayal hanging over me. I had survived it. And in the end, I was the one who walked away with my dignity intact. Sometimes people ask me if I ever think about her, if I ever wonder what happened to her. The answer is no. Olivia is just a name now, a cautionary tale, a mistake that will never be repeated. She thought she could destroy me. She thought I would crumble without her. But she was wrong. I didn't lose anything when I lost Olivia. She was the one who lost everything.